Hey everybody, my name is Matt Yocum, back here again today with Pro Sound Effects. Today we're going to be talking about the Warhammer episode of the series Secret Level, available on Amazon Prime. Walking through Warhammer, my goal here is to try and describe the different thought processes that take place whenever we're approaching any project, to help create a thought process that you can apply to your own projects to step through certain decisions and discussions with your directors or producers or whoever the creatives are in charge. This is a really fun episode to do. It's really big and bombastic. It's full of sound. So I hope you enjoy it, and let's get to it. Okay, so starting from the very beginning, one of the first things that we do whenever we start a brand new project, if it's available, is read through the script. Reading the script is a great time to get a sense for the story, the characters, to understand the plot from beginning to end, to see where we start, to see where we're going, and to hopefully come up with some sound-inspired ideas along the way. One of the earliest steps in the project then is to have a spotting session with the picture editor and the director. What this means is we essentially watch the film, and as we go through it, we stop along the way, usually scene by scene, and we talk about what are the stories that need to be told sonically. What am I supposed to be feeling? What are the emotions of the characters within the scene? Basically, it's our chance to understand from a storytelling point of view how sound design is going to help reinforce certain ideas and to help make other things feel impactful for the audience. On the Warhammer episode, I had a spotting session with the showrunner and director, Dave Wilson. Dave was an amazing collaborator, and when we were watching through Warhammer, he was giving me tons of information on the really rich and vibrant backstory on the universe of Warhammer. There's so much lore and so much to learn, and all of it was really useful information in informing some of my design decisions. One brief example of this is Dave was explaining to me that on the planet they land on in Warhammer, there is an evil god of sorts who can hear the nightmares and the fears and the anxiety of everybody around, and it ends up getting encoded and written down through this magical process, and the whole world is built on these sheets of paper which contain the fears of humanity, basically. And so even though it's not directly explained to the audience through exposition, informed design decisions when it came to putting things like whispers and creepy ambiences, knowing exactly what it was that was taking place. So we can directly influence the way the audience perceives something, even if there's no dialogue or exposition to explain what it is. The sonic cues can be enough sometimes to explain what it is that's going on, or to at least give a sense of the vibe of whatever it is that's taking place. Okay, so now to talk a little bit about the process of editing something like one of these big battle scenes. So what's really fun about this Warhammer episode is there's some really cool action with really beautiful animation. It's pretty gory, it's pretty intense, but it's a lot of fun. We get to watch these huge space marines basically annihilate an entire crowd of cultists. Now, the thing about editing any scene that's full of action like this one, in particular this canyon scene, is the job of the sound designer and the sound effects editor is to essentially cover, to be aware of all of the details of what's going on, and to do multiple passes of covering all of the details. So in a canyon scene like this, there's a lot of elements. The weapons, guns and rifles, there's bullet buys, there's bullet impacts, there's the impacts of the melee weapons, there's gore that is separate from maybe the metallic hits. Then there are the vehicles, there are ambient sounds, there are voices. So there are a lot of elements to cover. And then in between all of that are the little details of things like foley, of the feet, of the debris. So there's just layers and layers and layers. And I can actually show you in my Pro Tools session here. If I start at the top here, we go from Effects A, and then as I scroll down, I mean, you'll just see this, basically this section from here through to around here covers this battle scene. So if I scroll down, I mean, you can see there are a lot of layers going on here and a lot of stacks. The thing about this amount of sound information is that if I were to go in here and just wipe out all of the automation, like set all the volume at unity, pan everything center and left and right, remove all the reverb and do all that, and also set all the clip gain at unity, we would have a mess. So the editorial process is what I would call an additive process, meaning we are choosing and adding in sounds to cover the details of what it is that we are watching. And you may look at this and think, that's crazy, this will never play. How do I focus this? That's where the mix process comes in. Like I said, the editorial process is an additive process. We are adding in all of the sounds that we need to hear. Then the mix process is mostly a subtractive process where we are going, okay, what exactly do I need to focus on moment to moment? I don't need to hear every sound in every shot. What I need to do is to look at the screen, to look at what the character is doing or what action is being performed on screen, and to essentially focus the spotlight on those elements. So I'm going to peel away a lot of the other detail that is excessive around it so that we can focus, and that way we are clearing out a lot of mud. Then when we get to the next shot and something else is happening, I'm going to peel away the previous elements and bring up only the elements that I need for that particular shot. All of that is compounded once we add in music and dialogue, right? It gets even tougher to have things that stand out in the mix and to not just sound muddy and messy. When you're fortunate enough to have a great showrunner like Dave who plans ahead, he knew specifically where he wanted the moments to be, where it was going to be a big focus on sound effects, and then when we were going to hand off to music to really carry the emotional weight and the drive of the scene. So we go from this really action-packed scene, and then it gets really quiet when the Marine stops and plants his shield in the ground, and then we wind into this sort of rage mode where the Marines just go berserk, and what happens is the music takes over and becomes the driving force, and the sound effects are still there, but they are brought way down in the mix and serve more as texture. And this sort of trade-off is the sort of thing that needs to be kept in mind, because as a sound effects editor, I just need to cut all of the material, and then when it comes time to mix, we will make those decisions on what things need to be featured. Editing big, busy scenes like this is the exact reason why it's so important to have curated and organized, really great sounding libraries. And that is what Pro Sound Effects helps bring to the table. When I'm able to go search for my libraries with specific terms and pull up lots of great results, that makes my life a lot easier. Just a few of the libraries that I reached for on a regular basis on this came from the Odyssey collections, the Richard King collections. Some of the more specific ones, especially for an episode like this, were Colossal, Dark Matters, Detonate. There's a lot of great material available that was used to cut in these episodes. Okay, so I want to play one more clip here that I think is a lot of fun, and we're going to be talking about the importance of contrast in design and mix. So let's take a look at this. Okay, so just like in the previous canyon battle scene, there's a lot of sound going on here. And one of the most important tools that we have at our disposal for a scene like this is the use of contrast. Specifically, I'm talking about contrast in dynamics, and I'm also talking about contrast in terms of making choices that are tonal-based sounds versus noise-based sounds. And we're going to dive in and look at just a couple of specific examples here. Okay, so one of the really cool things about this scene is that we get these really cool pockets. So like, for example, in this section here, you know, we could have just used impact sort of explosion sounds here, but one thing that I wanted to come through was the idea that there's sort of this powerful force field that's filtering. And so what I ended up doing was creating these synthesizer hits that are these what I would call like bass flexes, or these sort of mid-tonal shapes. I'll solo a few of them for you now. Right, so within the context of the full mix, right, it helps give this sort of like low-end weight. And the beautiful thing about a sound like this that's got a little bit more mid-range to it as well is that it feels bass heavy coming through speakers, but it will also read on smaller speakers because it's in a higher register. So sometimes synthesis is a really great technique, and creating tonal things that have a little bit of movement to them will stick out and help add support in a really busy sounding noisy moment. And then contrast and volume obviously is very important. And this is a super loud scene, but we have these pockets of silence. And sometimes they're really small pockets of silence. So here's an example. Right? Okay, so let's just look through this real quick. So moment by moment. Right, so even on this stabbing of this sort of magical spear that the witch has here. Okay, so I want to focus on the fact that there are sort of rhythmic cuts in here, right? It's not just a continuous sound. Even just within this one pre-dub, we have some specific breaks. So this kind of goes, we'll get to what ding, right? So that may sound funny for me to say out loud, but you can hear the rhythm in that. And then similar thing here. Okay, so instead of just going bah and sustaining through and just creating one long explosion sound, it's super rhythmic. And it kind of continues to evolve. Right? So having things that have rhythm, but also these little pockets of silence, it's not just one continuous sound, it's cut in a more staccato way, really helps for things to cut through a mix. Right, so there's some of the missiles coming up, some really tonal elements, and then a really sharp transient. And again, this is a synthesized sound. The meat of this is a sound that I created in Serum. So there's a bass drop. And then that's a sound that I created in Serum. Right? And then that stuff all goes away very quickly once we move over into this next shot of the Space Marines. Okay, so I just want to give one last example here to sort of drive this idea home. So it would have been very easy to just do a single whoosh and a hit. And that's what we hear in just this one predub right here, right? Whoosh, impact. But then let's listen to the full mix. You can hear there's other elements going on here. So there's also the gore, which has it's not just a straight impact. It goes whooshka, right? Followed by this. And then this. And this right here really helps to give that kind of movement. And then when you put all of that together, and now we come in, and then once all that really loud stuff happens, now we've got this moment of quiet as the witch sort of furls her wings in. So all of this is contrast in tone, contrast in dynamics, contrast through rhythm. All this stuff is really important to keep in mind when we're cutting in really busy scenes, especially when it's going to be going along with music, fitting things in pockets around dialogue. All of this contrast is one of the best tools that we have at our disposal. One of the things that you'll hear mixers and sound designers say a lot is we have this phrase, if everything is a 10, nothing is a 10. In other words, if everything is as loud and as big as it can possibly be at all times, it eventually just sounds sort of normal. There's no contrast there. If you start at a 10, but something needs to grow and you just stay at a 10, it doesn't sound like you went anywhere. But if some things are down at 6 and 7, and then maybe something pops up to 9, and then we go back down to a 4, and then we hit a 10, the 10 feels huge if it's preceded by things that are smaller. So just keep that in mind as you're designing to make sure that you're utilizing contrast in order to create something that feels big. Okay, so just to wrap this up, I just want to say this was a super fun project to be a part of. Collaborating with Dave was a super rewarding experience. You should be doing the same on your projects. Get invested with your directors. Show them that you can bring ideas to the table, that you care about telling the story sonically. Show them what is possible through sound design. Sometimes we come up with ideas with our directors that they didn't know were even at their disposal. Other times you may come up with an idea and it may not work for this particular thing, and that's okay. That's the whole point of a collaboration. You're brought on to help guide this specific part of the process, and sometimes it informs everything around it. So don't be afraid to bring up the ideas that you have with your directors. I hope all of this was helpful. Thank you so much again to Pro Sound Effects for having me to talk about this episode. Working on Secret Level was a joy. If you want to go check it out in its entirety, this is episode 5. It's titled Warhammer 40,000, and They Shall Know No Fear. Check it out. Let me know what you think. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you back here for more in the next one.